This is Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas. The saying of the day is always hire smart people that are ambitious. My dad one time said, if you hire dumb people, make sure they're lazy, because if they're dumb and ambitious, they'll create more problems than you'll ever solve. So be sure and hire smart people that are ambitious. We have a smart person today on our podcast, and that's Judge Lee Yeakel, who served as a federal judge in the state of Texas, in Austin. For how many years were you a federal judge?
Just about exactly 20.
20 years as a federal judge. And I want to go back and let's talk about where you grew up. Where were you born?
I was born in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City, but you went to UT.
Yeah, I'm the ultimate trader. I graduated from high school in Oklahoma City, came to Austin to go to college, and never left again.
That's great. That's great. You that's where we crossed paths.
Yep.
At the University of Texas Law School, and you were in the class of 1969. I was a class of 1968.
That's right.
And I remember those days, and I always enjoyed being around you.
Well, you remember we also lived in the old barracks of married students' housings where we met, and those I always remember those because they had been World War I barracks down at Camp Swift in Bastrop and got mothballed between wars and were brought back again in World War II. And when World War II was over, the university bought them and put them on trucks and hauled them up and put them there on the banks of the Colorado River, and that was married students' housing. They
were the right price. They had 1, 2, 3, and 4. They had some 4 bedrooms, and the 4-bedroom was like $120 a month.
Yeah, that was the ritzy part. We had one of the duplexes, which was a 1-story barracks that they just divided in half. And so we had 2 little bitty bedrooms, and we had a living room where we could put 1 footstool down in the middle, and if you had a couple over, you could all use the same footstool. And I think we paid $37 a month, and that included the yard being cut, and utilities were just next to nothing.
Right. And you've told the story about if you're a neighbor, you had a neighbor they had a washer and dryer.
Well, we did. Apparently, the people lived in the other half of the barracks, the other half of the duplex.
They were rich.
Had a lot of money and had a washer dryer, and they just put these old barracks down on just cedar blocks. And whenever their washing machine or dryer went on the spin cycle, the whole building would shake, and we would think it was going to come off the blocks.
That's good. I like that. You graduated from UT and then undergraduate in the UT Law School.
Yes.
And so when you got out, what did you do?
Well, it was in those days, I'll say 2 things about if you were going to practice law in Texas. The jobs were in Houston and Dallas. Austin, 1969, was much smaller than it is now. It was a very small legal market, and there weren't any out-of-town firms here or anything like that. And so generally people were going to Dallas or Houston, but the Bar Journal in those days and always published in the spring an economic study about where the best jobs were if you were just interested in making money. And the year I got out of law school, it was Midland, because the oil business, as it always does, goes up and down and up and down. And they were in one of their big years, and they needed lawyers out there. The firms in Midland, Odessa were hiring, and they couldn't get lawyers to move out there. So if you just wanted to get paid, you would have gone to Midland. And I didn't feel like I was going to do that. In fact, I was in the Marines when I was in law school and was supposed to go on 3 years active duty, but they had determined that they were going to turn Vietnam into an Army war and get all the Marines out. And so I'd been clerking for a little law firm in Austin, and by the time the Marines decided they would go ahead and just discharge me, I had been with that law firm because nobody was going to hire me if I was going to leave to go into service anytime soon. And so they needed an associate. So when I say little law firm, it was called Mitchell, Gilbert, and McLean. And it was Mitchell, Gilbert, McLean, and Yokel. I was the associate. And so one day...
When it was at Mitchell that had the bar review?
That was Arthur Mitchell.
Mitchell.
Renowned lawyer.
He was a brilliant guy.
He was, and he taught for the longest time the only bar review course in the state, and he actually had purchased that when he was a law student at Baylor. there was an older woman who had it and would give little lectures, and Arthur somehow came across her and decided that she could make money with that, and he bought it when he was still a law student, so he would hire people to give all his lectures. But there's a whole generation of lawyers in Texas from about the mid-50s to the mid-70s that took Arthur Mitchell's bar review course, including me. But I got it for free because I worked for him. So
that's good. He went to Baylor Law School, and Cloyce Box, one of my best friends, was in law school with him, and later Arthur was general counsel for OKC, which later changed their name to Box Energy.
Yeah, OKC Corporation. In fact, after I practiced with that little firm for about 5 years, and then a couple other youngsters and I opened our own law firm, but I always stayed close to Arthur, and Cloyce got OKC some way. They were under investigation for a daisy chain deal when we first had price regulation on oil, and he was accused of having a group of friendly brokers. And so Arthur called me one day and asked me if I had the capacity to represent somebody, because there were all these people that were being investigated along with Box, and he couldn't represent them all because it'd be a conflict. And so he was looking for lawyers. And so I represented one of these people, and those people got to know Cloyce pretty well during all of
Cloyce, you know, they wound up, he pled for a misdemeanor that nobody had pled to in the history of the country, and they spent millions of dollars trying to get him, and they just didn't have a case.
Well, it was kind of the whole thing. The one I represented, the individual I represented, we pleaded to misdemeanors and just paid fines. Yeah. And after like 5 years of investigations and stuff, we did do that. But it was really interesting legal work, and Arthur was always interesting to practice around. Arthur was the term in today's practice was rainmaker, but Arthur just generated business because he represented all kinds of things. I look at lawyers today and they say, well, I'm specialized. Well, when you and I got out of law school, you were trained to be a lawyer. There wasn't this uber specialization, and if we had a piece of business come in that Arthur wanted me to work on, he'd tell me, if you haven't done this before, just go over to law school for the weekend, sit down in the library and learn everything you can about it. And that's what you did. And if you think about it, you spend 2 complete days studying something. It's kind of like a semester in that class, and you learned how to do it, and you went out and tried it.
Well, you'd read a law review article, and you'd read other things from the Bar Journal, and by Monday, you were an expert and could ask legitimate questions that sounded intelligent, and they were.
And it did, and that's what you were trained to do. You didn't worry about, well, I don't do this kind of work, or I don't do that kind of work. If it was a good, honest piece of work, you figured out how to do.
Arthur was a great lawyer there and a good friend, and I always enjoyed him. And we had a basketball player. When Cloyce had played basketball at West Texas State, then he played football for the Detroit Lions, and he held the record for receiving the most passes in an NFL game for the Lions of 12, and he held that from the 50s up until Roy Williams from Odessa Permian, who played at UT, broke the record with 14 catches in one game.
Well, you know, what I remember a lot about Cloyce was the Lions were one of the teams used to always play on Thanksgiving, and, you know, Cowboys later became one of them. Right. But if you watch the Thanksgiving Day game start, the lead-in always had big plays in Detroit's history, and 2 of them had Cloyce Box in them, scoring touchdowns.
You know, Cloyce and Bobby Lane were friends for the Detroit Lions and played together. And Night Train Lane was on the team from Austin. And Night Train, we're trying to get them to name something here for Night Train Lane. But Night Train still holds the record for most interceptions in a season in the NFL in 1952. And they didn't throw the ball that much back then.
No, they really didn't. He played at the old Anderson High School.
That's exactly
over
right.
East Austin. Yeah.
And we're trying to get them to name one of the stadiums or a street or something for Night Train Lane. Cloyce would take me with him when he'd go see some of his players. And we went to see Night Train, and he was in a nursing home in North Austin. went in to see, and he squealed, like a stuck pig when he saw Cloyce walk in. He was glad to see him. And they'd go back to Night Train's room and shoot dice. Night Train loved to shoot dice, and Cloyce would always leave him with, more money than he had seen in a long time. And they were really close friends. And he told him, I was a state senator at the time, and so he told him who I was, and I was a state senator from Lubbock. And so other people came in, and Night Train introduced me as a U.S. Senator from Montana. I don't know how I didn't correct him. They all want to know how things were in Montana. I saw nice and cool.
Cloyce had a lot of good stories. He told me one time when we were having a meeting, everybody involved, and we quit talking about the legal problems and we're just talking, and he said all the former professional athletes in Dallas, and there are a bunch of them that lived in Dallas, would get together from time to time and swap stories, and Mickey Mantle had retired and was living in Dallas, and he said, you listen to Mantle and you think all those stories about Yogi Berra are true. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, Mantle told him a story one night. They were in some town, and of course athletes weren't treated the way they are now. They had to share a room, and you had to walk from the ballpark back to the hotel, and the 4 or 5 of them had stopped at a little pizza place in Detroit or Cleveland or somewhere and ordered pizzas, and they were being cooked, and they started coming out of the oven, and Mantle says Yogi was over at the pinball machine playing pinball, and the guy at the counter said, you want these pizzas cut in 6 slices or 8 slices? And he said he yelled over at Yogi. He said, hey, Yogi, you want your pizza in 6 slices or 8 slices? Said, Yogi looked at him for a minute and said, better make it 6. I don't think I'm hungry enough to eat 8 tonight.
He made that correct. Mickey Mantle, they said, was playing golf one time, and they had he was on like the 17th hole, and he asked his caddy what should he use on the next shot, and he said 2 wood or a 9-iron. And he said, why? He said, that's the only ones you got left you hadn't broken. Oh. Because Mantle had thrown them up against the ground when he had a bad shot, and he'd break them. And so he had a caddy that gave him the unusual choice.
There you go.
You practiced with your firm there for a long time.
Yeah, I kind of through a series of firms. As I said, I was with Arthur for about 5 years, and then we had a little law firm, and I'd kind of move in and out, and then I would merge with a little bit larger law firm. Part of the time I was with the Midland firm, Stubman, McCrae, Seeley, Laughlin, and Browder, when they had an Austin office. And then in 1990, the firm I was with, small firm, we merged into the Austin firm of Clark, Thomas, and Winters, and I was with them in 1998 when I went on the bench.
Well, Clark Thomas was a great firm, and Seeley was a good friend, offered me a job in Midland, but I wanted to go to Lubbock. It was a bigger city, and so I went to Lubbock. But he was a great guy, and was a mainstay at the University of Texas, was on their board. Well,
one of the great trivia questions now that Austin has grown so much, and there are so many out-of-town and international law firms in Austin, that the first out-of-town law firm to open an office in Austin was Stubman McCrae.
Is that right? I did not know that.
And that's because the governor, and I forget who it was, whether it was Preston Smith or Dolph Briscoe, it might have been as early as John Conley, had appointed Mr. Seeley chairman of the Board of Regents. And Regents didn't have all the trappings and offices they have then, or they have now. And Mr. Seeley thought it'd be nice if his law firm had a little office in Austin so he'd have a place to hang out when he came for Regents meetings. So Stubman McCrae opened a little branch office, and that was the
didn't realize how they got started.
First out-of-town firm.
That's a big mainstay law firm for forever in the Permian Basin.
Yep.
They do a good job. Okay, let's talk about the judgeships. The first judgeship that you had was on the Court of Appeals out of Austin. That's the third court, isn't it?
It's the third court, yes.
And so tell me about how you got that judgeship.
Well, I had been involved in Republican politics in Austin. It was lonely in those days because, we're known as the blueberry in the bowl of tomato soup in political circles over here. And I'd actually been Republican county chairman in the late 80s.
I remember that.
I called it the world's worst unpaid job. And I stayed active in politics. And in the mid-90s or so, people would ask me from time to time, why don't you run for judgeship? And I didn't know if I wanted to be a judge, and I didn't know if I'd get elected because, as everybody knows, we elect all our judges in Texas. And in 1997, there was talk that there was going to be an opening. Well, there wasn't going to be an opening. There's one of the judgeships was open on the third court to run for. And it was held by a friend of mine who's a Democrat. And people came to me and said, why don't you run for this position? I said, well, there's never been a Republican elected in the court. And this fellow's a friend of mine, and I think he's doing a pretty good job. And I don't think he ought to have opposition just because there might be an opening for a Republican. But people would mention it from time to time. So my wife was at the time the executive director of the Texas Bar Foundation, the nonprofit arm of Texas lawyers. And so the National Conference of Bar Foundation executives met in conjunction with the American Bar Association every year. And I didn't always go to ABA meetings, but if they were meeting somewhere I liked, she would always have a hotel room because she had to go to her meeting. So this particular year, 1997, it was in San Francisco. So we go out to the airport, the old Mueller Airport, to fly out to San Francisco and run into two judges that I'd known pretty well. Bob Gamage, who was on the Supreme Court of Texas at the time. And
who'd been a state senator and a congressman and state representative.
Yes, all of the above. And but we were law school classmates. And then John Dietz, who, before he became a state district judge in Austin, was probably the best political operative that we had in Austin. I knew him in politics well before he ever went to law school and before he became a judge, and he was really good. He was a numbers counter. He could do it better than anybody I'd ever seen. And they're both Democrats because all of Austin was Democrats. And we're flying along out toward San Francisco, and Dietz looks at me out of the blue and says, I just had a great idea. You ought to run for the Third Court of Appeals. And I said, oh, John, I don't want to do that. Number one, I don't want to run against the fellow that's on there now. He's a neighbor of mine. I was in law school with him. His daughter's a lawyer now in offices in my building, and I'm not going to get on an elevator every morning and have her look at me and say, you're trying to put my daddy out of work. And plus, there's never been a Republican elected to the court in history. And he said, well, there will be sometime, and timing is everything. You might ought this. Well, then Gamage gets into the act and starts, no, you really need to do this. So they beat on me, as my wife says, till we got off the plane in San Francisco. And she then said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, it's worth thinking about, but I need to find out what the incumbent judge is going to do because I'm not going to run against him. And I knew that there was a little breakfast place in West Austin where
the incumbent judge was
John Powers.
Okay.
And so I knew he went to this particular place for breakfast every morning and read the paper. So I just walked in there one morning and went over and asked him if I could join him. And he said, sure, sit down. And we're talking. I said, well, Judge, let me just say this. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll just lay it out there. Are you running for re-election? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, no. And I said, well, I'm really surprised. I'd heard a rumor to that effect. He said, oh, you know me. He said, I don't give press conferences and things, but I've been on the bench long enough. I have grandchildren now. I just want to play with my grandchildren. So I decided I would run for that position. And there was another Republican in the race, and then there were two in the Democrat side, and the primary was going to be the March Super Tuesday primary in 1998. And the Chief Justice of that court at the time was a man named Jimmy Carroll from Temple, who I knew really, really well because I graduated from law school in 1969 and went to work for Arthur Mitchell. And in 1970, exactly a year after I got there, he hired Jimmy Carroll as a law clerk because he had known his father, who had been a lawyer. And so he clerked for the firm the first year I was a practicing lawyer, which meant he clerked for me because Arthur was always busy. So we had been good friends. And he said, I want you to know I'm going to resign in about a week. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, because I'm going to go home to Temple. The general counsel of Scott and White Clinic has retired, and they've asked me to come home and be general counsel of Scott and White. And so that was significant on two bases. He said, this is not a secret, but it's just not being talked about. I want you to know because it might help you in your race. And but the most interesting thing about that was Karl Rove, of course, a longtime counselor to Governor Bush, and I got to call Karl Rove and tell him that. And it's a high point in politics when you can ever tell Karl something he didn't already know. And so it was just fun to be able to call him and tell him there's going to be a vacancy the governor was going to get an appointment on, and he didn't know about it before anybody else did. And so I don't know who all were interviewed by the governor, but he appointed me to fill Chief Justice Carroll's unexpired term. And so I dropped out of the race for the other judgeship, became Chief Justice of the court in February of 1998.
And then what happened?
Well, one of the other judges on the court, Marilyn Abusi, very good judge from San Angelo, who was a Democrat, wanted to be chief, and she immediately announced she was going to run against me. And so I'm proud of both of us because we kept the race out of the court. We never had any animosity. And in November, I lost by a very narrow margin to her. The math is, or was at the time, for a Republican to be elected in that multi-county district, you were going to lose Travis County because it's a big Democratic county. So the way you had to piece it together was you had to carry the largest 4 or 5 counties that weren't Travis County, and that'd be Williamson, Hayes, Comell, and Tom Green, and which is out San Angelo. And but then what a lot of people overlooked, because Travis County was so big, there were more Republican votes in Travis County than there were in any of the other counties. So you had to carry the two western, everything west of I-35 had Republican votes in it. So you had to make sure you didn't just give up on Travis County. You had to get your vote. And then that would offset the Democrat vote in Travis County. And then the little bitty counties, Milam and Mason County and those, were all pretty conservative. So it was possible to win by a slight margin, but you had to carry those bigger counties. Well, I lost a narrow race to her because I lost Tom Green County, because she was from Tom Green County. And Tom Green County was a really conservative county that was going Republican, unless your name was Marilyn Abusi or Rob Janelle, who was chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. They were the local, homegrown
conservative
Democrats, and you were never going to beat one of them. And so I lost a narrow race, and then Governor Bush, bless him, appointed me to fill Abusi's unexpired associate justice seat, because she had to resign that to become Chief Justice after the votes were counted. And so I served another appointed period, and then when I ran in 2000, I won, first Republican elected to the court, and I won without Democrat opposition. I'm pretty proud of that.
Sure. And then you served until you went on the federal bench.
Yeah, I was in the Court of Appeals terms are 6-year terms. And when I won that seat, I was in a 6-year term. And in 2000, Governor Bush became President Bush. And there were some openings for federal court in Texas, including the Austin bench, where we had 2 district judges. And there was one seat available that came up, and it was those things are pretty highly sought after because they're appointments for life. And I had a bunch of people come to me. I was honored to say, well, you need to put in, because there are going to be 5 federal judicial openings in Texas, and one in Austin, one in San Antonio, 2 in El Paso, and 1 in Beaumont. And you won't find this in the Constitution anywhere, but the district judgeships, the federal trial courts, start with the senators. The senators usually recommend somebody to the president, and the president, only in the rarest of circumstances, goes against the senators. And so I went through the screening committee process with Senators Cornyn and Hudson. In fact, you were on that.
I was on that committee. You did a good job.
And so the senators decided I would be one of the people that they would interview after the screening committee did this, and then they favorably reported my name to the president, and the president appointed me, and I went through the confirmation process, which was interesting. Not quite as interesting as it is now, but it was still.
Well, it wasn't. You were appointed in May, or I think it was May, and then you were approved in like July. I mean, it took like 2 months.
Well, it was a little longer than that because the senators sent my name over the end of January, but the nomination wasn't made then because they want the background. The president wants the background check on you. And so the FBI gets going on this tremendously intrusive background check. I told my wife if she ever wanted to know anything about me, she could probably get a copy of that report under the Freedom of Information Act and find out everything I'd ever done in my life up to that moment. And then once the background check comes back, then the president makes the nomination. And he nominated me in May, and I was confirmed in July. And
I was thinking that it was like 2 months from the time he nominated you, because it was pretty fast. In this day and time, you don't have a 2 month turnaround.
No, it's just unbelievable, and
it's strictly partisan now. Did you have any opposition votes against you?
I came out of the Judiciary Committee with a unanimous vote, and in a roll call vote on the floor of the Senate, I was unanimously confirmed. That wasn't 100 to nothing because there were a few absentees, but it was. I'm really pleased to say that it was unanimous.
No matter who it was in this day and time, that wouldn't happen.
No, and I can tell you one thing about politics. Anytime you see a straight party line vote in the Senate on a nominee, you know it's purely political. It's not about the nominee. There's not anybody that's put up for a judge that 100% of the Republicans feel one way about and 100% of the Democrats feel another way about. You know, it's right. So I'm glad I got through it when I did, because it's a whole different system right now.
Well, it changed, and it changed when they appointed Bush appointed the guy that was.
Well, it was Robert Bork was the first big one. That was Reagan appointed.
Yeah, now they'll say if somebody gets turned upside down, everything, that they just got borked.
Yeah, and it was. Judges are important, but almost everything we deal with is not something that attracts national attention.
Yeah.
And, Austin is kind of what's known as a hot bench, because we get in the federal court in Austin everything that comes out of the legislature and all kinds of stuff. So we get some of those high-profile cases, and a lot of times you read in the media and you think that's all we do. I don't know how many zeros you'd have to put to the right of the decimal, even in Austin, to get to a percentage of big cases. Almost everything we do are what I would term the legal problems of the folks.
Yeah, they're actual lawsuits that are real lawsuits, and they don't have any political implications.
No, and in this environment, you hear all this about judges. Well, a whole lot of what we do are big corporate cases. The business community needs judges hearing their cases.
Right.
The mom and pop need the federal judges hearing their cases. Almost everything I did, and I had my share of the headline-making cases too, but almost everything, there wasn't anybody in the courtroom except the lawyers and the parties for the case that was in front of me. They didn't attract attention. Almost everything any judge at the trial level doesn't attract any attention, but it needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly, and it needs to be done efficiently so people's businesses can go on.
Right. And then you took senior status.
No, I retired.
You resigned. You did, because then you went with a firm.
Yeah, I have a little part-time job with King and Spalding, very fine law firm.
They're originally out of Atlanta.
One of their partners, Griffin Bell, had been on the Fifth Circuit and then was President Carter's Attorney General. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm working with young lawyers and working with trial and appellate teams. They don't expect a whole lot of me, and I don't try to dissuade them of not expecting a whole lot out of me, but it's really kind of fun. It's I don't know how long I'll be able to do anything, but I wanted to retire instead of take senior status because I knew an awful lot of good judges when I was practicing law that mentored me and were really good, and then met a whole different group of them when I was a judge, and they were colleagues. And too many of those fine jurists are not remembered the way you ought to be remembered, because you're always remembered for the end. And let me tell you, you get to where you like the lifestyle of being a judge. It's fun to have people call you judge, and it's fun to have people do what you tell them to. So you can get used to it, and then you get to the age where you really can't do the job anymore, but you won't let go. So you're not remembered the way you were in the prime. And I'd always planned, and I wanted to leave when I could still do the job instead of having to leave because I couldn't do the job, and have people who wanted to grade me in the future grading me on when I was really doing what I considered my best legal work as a judge. And so I've enjoyed retirement. Also, you get to talk about things when you're not a judge anymore.
Yeah, you can talk to anybody about anything.
That's right, and that's fun. And I wanted to do that, and I wanted to get involved in doing some things that I really couldn't do if I was still a judge, like some, I'm on some committees over at the University of Texas now and doing things like that, and I'm just really enjoying it.
We hope you've enjoyed part one of Chancellor Hance's conversation with Judge Lee Yeakel. Check back Thursday of this week for part two, when Judge Yeakel discusses his love of UT athletics and some of the more humorous things that have happened in his 20 years on the bench. Thank you for listening to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas podcast.